Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and I am coming to you here live on the FTN Network, the world famous FTN Network. Let's face it, if you're going to play DFS, season-long dynasty, sports betting, PrizePicks, any money-making opportunities when it comes to sports, you should definitely be doing it at the FTN Network, where we can help you become not only a better player, a competitive player, but pad the bankroll so that you too can have the money to buy a new washer and dryer. It's a great feeling, let me tell you. Anyways, we have a great show lined up for you tonight. I'm extremely excited. We're still grinding through the slate that's happening right now. We're off to a great start. We've got late hammers. There's so much goodness happening. I feel so good. A couple of things to talk about before we get into our slate breakdown. There is still the wonderful promotion that is 50% off your first month, any subscription at ftndaily.com. All you need to do is use the code NIGHTHOOPS, NIGHTHOOPS. 50% off your first month. If you've been kind of on the fence, or maybe you've been watching the show for a while and you really want to take your game to the next level, or you just want to be in tune, or you want to be in our great Discord community, now's the time to try that out before that code expires, getting that first month so that you can see what we're all about, because we're so much more than just written content and top plays. Not only do we have that stuff, and it's very good, we have optimizers, we have projections, we have pre-lock shows happening for the subs only. We have bet trackers, we have PrizePicks, we have Underdog, we have DOA, we have everything from NFL, NBA, NHL, college sports, esports. We got NASCAR, we got all of that stuff covered. One price, one subscription. There is an NBA package that will get you college basketball if that's more your speed and you want to focus on that. Or you could go with the FTN Daily Plus, which gets you access to all of the sports that we cover. And getting that first 50% off there is going to allow you to do that. And very, very good stuff happening all the time. The fact is, I'm very proud. The first two Mania seats that have been giving out, both to avid watchers of the show and community members. We had a jam winner last night. Mighty Ham's longtime watcher and supporter of the show, and is in the FTN Discord and an avid sub and supporter of our content. Took home the jam last night for a couple G's. There's lots of good stuff happening. Jam-packed weekend as always. We have the 8-game main slate transpiring tomorrow/today, depending on when you're watching it. So that's what we're going to cover. There's also a 3-game night slate that we'll be able to talk about a little bit potentially. I'll be back here tomorrow morning, 1 hour before the lock of both, but it'll be a primarily college football show, last-minute news, injury stuff, just kind of rehashing my thoughts. That's tomorrow, 8 a.m. PST, 11 a.m. EST. Pre-lock CFB show. We're doing it all. Lots of coverage. Up on the site right now, you can find slate breakdowns for the main CFB slate, and the trackers are loaded with great stuff such as props, PrizePicks, underducks, and everything in between. So really a lot of good stuff happening here at the FTN Network. I'm super, super excited about it, and you guys definitely should check that out if you're not already. The Discord in itself, I say this all the time, the community is fantastic. It really is worth the sub and worth the price of admission, no doubt. Really a bunch of crazy stuff happening, man. Like let's talk about the college basketball season a little bit before we delve into the slates. It's a lot of teams underperforming. Parity looks like it's going to run wild. We are going to be in store for a very, very fun tournament. I know it's November, but it's already chaotic, and there are upsets happening and buy game losses happening. And I think we're going to have a really fun tournament, big time upsets galore. Parity in the game of college basketball is a good thing. A lot of people thought it was going to be top heavy and it was going to be like those, mid 90s years or in early 90s where it's like the same group of teams there dominating all the time. But we're already seeing it, man. We're already seeing it. Early in the season, James Madison pulling off a win against Michigan State. Now James Madison team's going to be awesome. We're seeing buy game losses from a lot of teams. And really, there's teams that aren't as good as I thought they were going to be that have just been a disappointment. Obviously, my Huskies getting off to kind of a slow start there under Hopkins. I thought that they would be better. Rutgers has kind of fixed things up and looked better. I thought they were going to really be just kind of gangbusters good here to start. And there's just been a few teams that are really just quite underwhelming. I think that we're going to be in for something really fun, though. I'm excited about this season. A couple of things that happened today watching that Florida State games. 9 different players with 3+ fouls. Hate that. Refs taking over the game. Kind of a reminder that, yes, it is college basketball, and yes, fouls are a thing, and that happens. Foul trouble galore, so you have to kind of prepare for that. Also, Auburn winning games, but they're doing it with such a deep roster. I don't know that they're going to be super fun for DFS purposes either. We're seeing the maturation and development of Hunter Salas for Wake Forest already with Coach Forbes. And then another really disappointing team for me is the Maryland Terrapins, who lost today by a score of 57-40, and they're now 1-3 after a win over Mount St. Mary's, which they comfortably won, but they looked like they were on the ropes at times. Turn around and lose a close game to Davidson. Then they lose a close game to UAB, and then Villanova just kind of curb stomps them. And there's some problems here for Kevin Willard, because I thought Maryland was going to be a lot better of a program, losing 3 games in a row like this. Part of the problem watching them is they're just not going to Julian Reese enough. I know he's getting into foul trouble, but Deshaun Harris-Smith, obviously a youngster, he's got to be able to make entry passes. Jameer Young has just been like really not himself from what we saw last year, and there's just no consistency or continuity, and there's no gelling of this roster. Julian Reese is having to kind of almost force things, and they're not able to hit threes with any regularity, and it's just a mess. This Terps team is an absolute freaking mess. So I'll chalk them up as one of the disappointing teams for me this year that I thought was going to be better. Several teams that I expected to be better and weren't. Let's see. We're going to get into it now. I don't try not to be distracted. There are games happening. The last 2, South Carolina DePaul and the Washington Huskies versus Xavier. Of course, I want to see my Huskies do well. I feel really upset about Mike Hopkins. I've like had my confidence fully shaken at this point, and I'd like to get that back. So a win over Xavier right now would be nice. I have that playing in the background, but focused on the task at hand here will not distract me, I promise. Now, if you're watching the show live, or even if it's on demand, please do me the favor and honor of dropping a like on this video. If you interact with me throughout the show, or drop a comment on the on-demand version of the show, it really helps. Anything you can do to support, via the like, the shares, the comments, it all does a lot for the program and gets us seen in front of more people, and more views means more content, more goodies, more fun stuff for you and us here at FTN. All right, so all that out of the way, got my little chatter out. There's just a lot to get into, so we're going to jump right into the 8-game slate here. Now, FanDuel is starting to have slates as well. Not going to quite incorporate FanDuel into these breakdowns just yet, but if they continue to churn out slates and they're pretty decent with contests, then we will start talking about some FanDuel stuff as well. All right, first game on the slate. Let's get into it. 8-game slate starts at 9 a.m. PST, noon EST, locked right at the same time as the college football slate. Saturdays get wacky here for a couple of weeks, but we're up for it. All right. Mississippi State taking on the Washington State Cougars. This is an interesting one here. Per Ken Palm, he has Mississippi State winning 72-64. 213th in tempo ranking for the Bulldogs. The Cougars 273rd. Defensive efficiency-wise, Mississippi State is playing really well. They have a top 5 defensive efficiency, and their defensive field goal percentage #1 in the nation. Wins over Arizona State, Tennessee Martin, and North Alabama. None of those are murderers' rows. Of course, they beat Arizona State in that awful presentation of the Barstool Invitational. Arizona State, not a good team, but they took care of business there, and they've just taken care of business with who they played. Now they get this neutral court game against a decent, not a great, but a decent Washington State team. The starting 5 for Mississippi State looks like this at the current iteration, barring obviously no Tolu Smith and some injuries. But Cameron Matthews, DJ Jeffries, Jimmy Bell, Trey Fort, and Deshaun Davis. Now, in the first game there against Arizona State, I told you this freshman, Josh Hubbard, he is amazing. He is going to be fantastic. We need to use this guy. And I know against Arizona State, he played only 12 minutes. 6 points, 2 rebounds. You guys kind of looked at me sideways like, where'd you get this kid from? We are seeing him explode faster than even I would have thought. Following that Arizona State game, he plays 21 minutes off the bench against Tennessee Martin, 30% usage rate. It's important to note in that Arizona State game that he played just the 12 minutes, his usage rate was 30%. When he's out on the court, he's going to be doing things, making things happen, have the ball in his hands. 22 real points against Tennessee Martin, 5 of 8 from downtown, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, a block, and a steal. Goes up against North Alabama, 22 minutes off the bench, 26% usage rate, 12 points, took 9 threes, made just 2 of them, but still 2 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals. Trey Hubbard, my man, the youngster, he is flourishing, and he is going to be very, very good. But because of this production that he's had, his price has jumped up to 5.7, and it does become very difficult to use him there because it is a better team. We know he's probably capped between 18 to 22 minutes right now, and 5.7 is just a little bit too much to dedicate there. But I think he's absolutely in play for GPPs because of his high usage rate, because of his high shot rate, and he's just doing some fantastic things. Right now, his shot rate is 36%, which is top 40 in the country. He does have an assist rate of 29%, a usage rate of 29.3%, and he's making 43% of his triples on 21 attempts. So this is going to be a big-time guard for this program. Deshaun Davis will be out of there. Shaquille Moore will be out of there, and you're going to see Hubbard just really kind of take flight. Now, Trey Fort is somebody to look at. The was Tennessee Martin at one time, then JUCO level. Started all 3 games thus far. He was really good against ASU. 33 minutes played, scored 21 points, hit 5 triples. Since then, he has played 16 and 22 minutes because of the blowouts. He has looked really, really good. 6'4" is an interesting price for him. It's probably a little bit too high price for your main build, of course, but I think in this matchup, in a close game, we see his minutes go back over 30, and he has the potential here to take a ton of shots. Very, very shot reliant, which can make things difficult, but he does have a 23% shot rate, and he's shooting 48% from distance on 19 attempts. As far as the rest of Mississippi State goes, you have guys like Cam Matthews, who, he's been over 20 fantasy points in 3 straight, but 6'9" is a pretty tough ask. You have Shaquille Moore sitting there at 6'1". He made his season debut, after being on the suspension or on the outs, the coach's doghouse, if you will. 14 minutes off the bench in that game. Can't really use him right now until we see if he's going to start or not, if he takes Trey Fort's spot. I really don't think there's any reason for him to do that, though. And then you have the Marshall transfer, Andrew Taylor, who we warned would not be in the same role that he was in at Marshall. You might remember Taylor at, with Tavion Kinsey, those 2 9K options in Marshall, putting up 40 fantasy points a game, but that's just not going to be the role that he has here. He's stuck in a reserve role where he's going to play upwards of 12 to 15 minutes only, and he's 5'9". The price started out like his Marshall days in 9K, dropped to 7.5. Now it's 5.9. We're going to eventually get him under 4K, where he will become somewhat interesting because he can actually pay off 4K in 15 minutes. We're just not there yet with him quite yet at the moment. We saw a big game out of Jimmy Bell last time against the North Alabama squad, 14 rebounds. The game before that against Tennessee Martin, 12, and against ASU, 9. So he is rebounding at a very high clip. Jimmy Bell has sort of been kind of a limited offensive option, while he was at St. Louis. Spent a year at West Virginia, but he's always been a really strong rebounder. And he actually had a 15% offensive rebounding rate last year, which would have been tops in the Big 12 conference there. Already this year, he has a 27.6% defensive rebounding rate and an 18.4% offensive rebounding rate. Now, he's not going to generate a lot of offense for himself. He's going to get a lot of putback opportunities or somebody else setting the table for him. So he's a little bit limited in that regard, but he's a shot blocking machine and he's a high-end rebounder. 6'8's a little bit of an uncomfortable price because he is somebody over the course of his career that has had a fouls called rate of 4.5 to 5. He hasn't been getting into foul trouble yet this year, but consider the opponents. Overall, I would think it's a little bit more risk to use him at that price than anything besides AGBP. Now, forwards has typically been a tough spot for us to fill. We want to play guards all the time. We need all these guards, right? So you can consider him for that alone, but Wazoo on the other side does have some front court options that could potentially get him into foul trouble or at the very least frustrate him or lower his upside. And then you have DJ Jeffries at 6'7". At one time at Memphis, it was thought that he could be an AAC Player of the Year type candidate. It hasn't really worked out. The price on him was $8K to start. He's dropped to 6'7". He's going to play a decent chunk of minutes, but he's just, highly rated recruit, just hasn't panned out. And we really can't consider playing him. Now, if he was 5'7", like he was the Hubbard price, I could sort of maybe get behind looking at Jeffries to a degree. If he was 4'7", I think it'd be like, wow, let's roll DJ Jeffries. But at 6'7", that's pretty difficult for us to get to. We've had them on a couple of slates so far. We kind of know what to expect from this group. Now, the Washington State side, we have not had them on a slate just yet. So we'll go into it. They have had a bunch of changes to their roster, right? They TJ Bamba over in Villanova now, Mogay in the G League, DJ Rodman over at USC. So they've kind of, lost some of their key players and so far they've looked good. Nice win over Idaho, a convincing win over Prairie View A&M. Cal Smith's got something going here, but this will be a good test against a very tough Mississippi State team. They have a pretty weak non-con, just Eastern Washington, Portland State, UC Riverside, Grambling State, an interesting game against Santa Clara, a tough one against Boise State, and then they'll get into conference play there. So they could potentially be – this is a team to me that looks like a full of non-con heroes because I don't think they're going to be tested too much in the non-con. Looking at the starting five of Washington State, Andrzej Jakumovski, Miles Rice, Isaac Jones, Joseph Yesefu, and they went with Ruben Chinyelu, who is a freshman, has started their first two games so far, a kid from Nigeria playing the center spot for them. Isaac Jones, a transfer from Idaho. He was a big-time producer for Idaho last year, 29% usage rate, 27% shot rate. He actually had a field goal percentage of 63%. Draw 7 fouls per 40, 3.5% block rate. Kids from Spanaway, Washington, they weren't interested in him in the Huskies program, but, he was an absolute menace in the Big Sky. Now he's getting to play for the Cougars. So far, 34.2% usage rate. That's top 30 in the country. He is handling a lot of the heavy lifting. 24.6% shot rate, an offensive rebounding rate of 23.3%, which is 7th best in the country, a combined rate of over 42%, block rate 6.5%, steal rate 3.5%, drawing 9.3 fouls per 40, and he's shooting 68% from the field. So Isaac Jones has been fantastic. Obviously played lesser tier competition, laid some wood on his former team Idaho, and then spanked Prairie View A&M. He is going to be needed in a much bigger role here against Mississippi State. I'm interested to see who wins the battle of toughness there between him and Jimmy Bell on the glass. Jones, an elite rebounder. Bell's been a very elite rebounder himself. The price of $8K on Jones might be a little bit tough, but it's definitely in play. He's not a guy where you see these transferred up from smaller schools where their prices haven't adjusted yet, or they're priced like they're still at their old schools, and it's like that's an easy write-off. With Isaac Jones at 8K, he's not an easy write-off, and he's absolutely somebody that's in our player pool and potentially knocking on the door of a main team play here. Because I do think he'll be the one to get Jimmy Bell in foul trouble. I don't know that Jimmy Bell will be the one to get him in foul trouble. Jakimovski's been a solid role player, kind of like one of those high-end role players throughout the course of his career. He's 6'6", scored over 34 fantasy points in back-to-back games. I could see him being relatively popular. I do have concerns because he can have a tendency to disappear at times. Right now, looking at their roster, he's playing such a big role because they don't have a lot of other options. And so far, he's shooting 46% from long range. His shot rate is 26%. His block and steal rate are both high. He's getting it done on that end of the ball, or on that side of the defense, and he's also shooting lights out from long range. He's been about a 35-36% career three-point shooter. He might be elevating his game to the next level, and if that's the case, Jakimovski is somebody to certainly consider as well, especially if we think he's going to be relatively popular. I thought Jay Mullins was going to be a big-time player for this squad as well. He has not been able to land himself into the starting rotation. He was a starter, spot starter throughout the year last year, but it looks like Yesefu's kind of pilfered that from him. He's more just a second unit bench guy at 4'2". He's playing roughly 19, 20 minutes off the bench, but not really probably a very good value for us at this moment in time. You do have Miles Rice sitting there at 5'5". He's looked really good. Took 13 shots in their previous game, 9 before that. He is shooting 45% on those 22 field goals, averaging way more points than I would have thought, at least this early. I think Rice is pretty interesting as a second year redshirt freshman type. His shot rate's 26%, drawing 5 fouls per 40 at 22.4% assist rate. I thought it, like I said, might take a little bit longer for him to get acclimated. The Mississippi State defense can cause a more inexperienced player like this trouble, but I certainly have interest in him at 5'5". We had a plethora of these 5 to 6K options at guard on the slate tonight, and you could make a really good lineup without having to sacrifice too much or go with the traditional studs and scrubs. And that is a player in Miles Rice who can definitely represent that type of play for us. Joseph Yesefu is even better at 4'8". I could see him getting some ownership. Now, he hasn't done a whole lot. We haven't seen him get back to that level of play that we were accustomed to during his time at Drake. When he spent a couple of seasons with Drake in the year they went to the tournament, he was a phenomenal scorer and fearless. Relegated to bench duty for Kansas, showed flashes during injuries and when he got playing time. And now he comes into a situation with the Cougars where he should be able to thrive. He is in the starting lineup, but he's definitely splitting time with Mullins. I would expect his shots to go up further right now as the Cougars play weaker of competition. Everybody's able to kind of get going. It's tough because right now we don't have an established pecking order for the Cougars. So it could very easily be Yesefu who takes off in this game. Perhaps Rice continues. Maybe they lean on Jones and Jakimovski. But I'm certainly interested in multiple options here, not all in the same lineup, but throughout my various MME builds. Kamani Husino, who's at 3'8", he's playing roughly 15 to 20 minutes. He's a fine value. He had moments last year, again, during injuries when he would have to step into the starting lineup or get some additional minutes. He's somebody who is at least interesting in that regard. He's been a solid rebounder so far this year. He is a bit young and raw, but he is developing nicely. Chiniello at 5'2" as a starter. He is the dreaded fifth starter. They had a first great game against Idaho, but he kind of disappeared there in their second game. Also only had to play 11 minutes. I don't see Chinyello getting many minutes to really matter at 5.2. If he was like near min price, then we're talking about a really cheap starter, but 5.2 still a little bit too much there and could really do some damage to our lineup. So we don't really need to go there. Instead, I think I would try to focus most of my exposure to this team between the Rice, Jones, Jakumovski trio with a little bit of Yesefu. On the other side, I still like Hubbard even with the price increase, but there's nobody on that Mississippi State team that's really necessary for your main lineup. There's some answers that have to be, or some questions that have to be answered for both of these teams in regards to pecking order and rotation still before we get too crazy. All right, next game we have Georgetown going up against Mount St. Mary's. The Hoyas, new coaching staff, but it seems like we're at least early on getting the same old results. Georgetown losing a tough game at home, a bye game to Holy Cross. Then they drop a game to Rutgers where they really just didn't look competitive at all, and they blew the doors off Lemoyne. Good on them. So far through 3 games, Ed Cooley's group is awful defensively. Their defensive efficiency is near the bottom of the collegiate basketball landscape. With that being said, I think they'll eventually get it turned around. There is some talent on this team, and I think they're headed in the right direction. And I don't think anybody would argue that Cooley's a better coach than Patrick Ewing, right? So that's kind of goes without saying. The starting 5 for Georgetown in the last game there: Dontrez Styles, Jay Heath, Jaden Epps, Supreme Cook, and Rowan Brumbaugh. Jay Heath came off the bench for the first 2 games, got the start last game and played 33 minutes. And we had kind of said, don't be surprised if he does, get his way into the starting lineup. He started over Drew Fielder there, the freshman who played in their first 2 games, was okay. Foul trouble, but came off the bench against Rutgers, played 15 minutes, was just stuck in foul trouble there as well. I think that's the right call to play the lineup with Jay Heath, who is a veteran, gives them a little bit more offensively and just makes them a lot more dangerous of a team. But it does limit their size. In that lineup, Supreme Cook playing the 5 at 6'9", Dontrez Styles playing the 4 at 6'6". We also saw Jaden Epps, who had a pretty nice game for the minutes he played, but he did have a chunk of time he missed due to injury. Doesn't appear to be something that we are going to have to worry about. But he is at least banged up to a degree that we have to kind of pay attention. But at the same time, he's still relatively cheap and playing in a matchup that theoretically he should do really, really well in. I think Epps, with the way that Cooley's kind of been, glowing about him throughout the offseason and now into the season, he's going to continue to be an alpha player for this team and have the ball in his hands an awfully lot. So far, the highest usage on the team does belong to Jaden Epps at 27.9%. His shot rate is 24.6%. Assist rate of 30.5%, shooting 31% from long range, but he is getting volume on 19 attempts, and he has been money at the foul line. So if he can generate points there late in the game, he's generally going to rack those up. Still like Jaden Epps quite a bit at 6'1". Don't think he's a lock and load by any means, but that is a price point that I would suspect a lot of people try to get to, just knowing how much usage and how much minutes he's going to actually get. Supreme Cook is interesting here. This is a matchup he can kind of bang on. 7 sticks, still not the best price for him, but he's playing upwards of nearly 30 minutes, operating as the center. The Rutgers front court just did not have any time to mess around. They kind of bullied Cook around, pushed him around. Welcome to the high major basketball, right? I do think this is a nice little bounce back spot for him. Looking at his rates, doesn't have the highest usage and shot rate, but he is an elite offensive rebounder. Does get a fair amount of putbacks and is capable of really stomping on a team like Mount St. Mary's that has been a good defense or offensive rebounding team in their own right, but overall not somebody that I think is going to be able to stop Supreme Cook in the same manner that Rutgers was able to. So he is there at 7'6" as maybe a luxury style play, far from a must, but he is fine if you want to go there. Rowan Brumbaugh, still like him long-term more than Jaden Epps because I think he'll stick around longer. First 2 games were fantastic. Really struggled against Rutgers. We get a slight price drop to 7-1 here. Again, an easier matchup, so we we certainly want to consider these guys. And then you have Dontrez Styles, who at 6K is fine, and he comes with guard forward eligibility. So if you're finding yourself having difficulty filling your forward slots, you can definitely look at Dontrez Styles. It's going to play over 30 minutes. Even in these games that kind of blow out, he's playing big time. He's been rebounding well. He's looking for a shot. He's just a totally different player. And we knew he had this ability during his time with UNC. There was never a chance for him to get those minutes that he's finally getting now. As far as the Georgetown bench goes, Fielder is not going to be cheap enough yet to even really consider. He's still pretty raw. And now that Heath is in the starting lineup, and I suspect that to continue, there's really nobody on the Hoyas bench that we need to concern ourselves with. Jay Heath is a really nice GPP look. He shot 3 for 11 there against Rutgers. I think obviously we know he's going to get volume. 24 minutes off the bench against Lemoyne. He shot 12 times. Going to be reliant on his scoring there, but 6'2" is a really, there's a lot of meat on the bone there for Jay Heath to hit his upside at a price point like 6'2". So I do like him quite a bit for alt builds. I do think that you still stick around with Jaden Epps in your main lineup, though. Whether you want to use guys like Styles, Brumbaugh, and Cook in your MME stuff, that's up to you, but they're definitely viable options, no doubt. The Mount St. Mary's group, I think they can and will do well in this spot. Georgetown right now, they will under Cooley. It's going to take time, but they will be better. As of right now, though, we can look to target guys against them. The spot with Mount St. Mary's not the best. There is a distinct lack of impressive options, especially at the prices that they are. You look at how well they played against Maryland in the first half before finally bowing out. And in the second game, they took care of business against Coppin State. The starting five that we have seen: Jede Cordelia, Xavier Lipscomb, Joshua Reeves, George Tinsley, and Dakota LaFew. Usage-wise, LaFew 24% and 23%. He's obviously the most expensive at 7.3. He's fine. He's going to play lots of minutes, but there's a lot of lacking upside there at the 7.3 price point. You can start looking down below 5K for some of these spot players, but there's really not a whole lot to like here. Reeves as a 25 to 30 minute player at 4.5 sounds nice on paper, but what is he really going to do? He has taken 20 shots in the past 2 games. He won't offer you any secondary stats. So he's going to have to knock those shots down and a very high clip as well. I mean, he scored 10 and 12 real points, still barely got himself to 13 fantasy points in each of those games. So just kind of shows you how tough it's going to be for him to make value at that 4 or 5 price. And just, I think somebody will come out of Mount St. Mary's probably doing well. If I had to say somebody, I think George Tinsley would make sense, right? But we don't need to get too cute here with the Mount St. Mary's team. All right, next game on the slate we're going to be talking about here, Minnesota versus USC Upstate. I loved USC Upstate last year. I thought they had a legitimate chance to make the big dance. Obviously, things fell by the wayside a little bit. Minnesota coming off a loss to Missouri in which they controlled most of the game before just mistakes and missed shots and boneheaded stuff happened, and same old story for Ben Johnson. They end up losing 70-68. So they get a chance to bounce back here against Upstate. KenPom has it 80-67 in favor of Minnesota, 218th in tempo ranking for them, 241 for USC Upstate. Let's start with USC Upstate before we get into Minnesota. The Upstate guys have played 4 games already, and they've been playing the murderer's row of non-con. So kudos to them for scheduling tough. South Carolina, Vanderbilt, East Carolina, and Minnesota. They beat East Carolina by 2. Big time win over East Carolina. And then they played a Carolina University that's not North or South Carolina. It's just Carolina University, which our man Alex, North Carolina State superfan, so eloquently pointed out is, are they even a real school? Kind of the shtick that he's got right now. In the East Carolina win, which, like I said, was pretty damn impressive, honestly, go back and stream some of that. It wasn't bad. The starting five that they ran, Justin Bailey, Trey Broadnex, Nick Alves, Amir Langeles, and Jordan Surratt. Now, they play their starters a good amount, and then Miguel Ayese, Floyd Redu, and Jalen Brazili are their bench pieces. So about a 7 to 8 man rotation. Usage and efficiency-wise, Trey Broadnex has a 24.5% usage rate, 25% shot rate. Justin Bailey, 25% usage rate, 29% shot rate, also making 39% of his threes, 3.5% steal rate. Nobody else really jumps off the page. We got a lot of 18 to 19%. Miguel Ayese shooting 56% from long range on 18 attempts. That's relatively intriguing for a guy coming in there and jacking threes there. Played 27 minutes off the bench against East Carolina. He's taken no less than 4 threes in any of his games so far, and he's taken 7 in 2 of those 4. So you have a guy stepping in there and just letting it fly. In the olden days, as they say, we would have got him at min price, and it might have actually thought about it, because you look at what he's been doing, it's not that bad. But at 5K, you need a little bit more than what he's showing. But he is jacking up shots, and he's not afraid to do it. 17 real points against Vanderbilt, 14 real points against ECU. I do not hate him as a play by any means. Would have loved him a lot more at like 3.5, but he's certainly worth a shot there as you build out your MME stuff and your player pool. Broadnex, who has some of the best rates on the team, he's priced accordingly at 6.8. Don't mind him either. I think a similar role as Noah Carter for Missouri. And we just saw Noah Carter have a really nice game against Minnesota. So Broadnex is one of those, low major guys that people aren't going to know about, a price point that maybe people are a little uncomfortable with, but this is a matchup against Minnesota that he can absolutely perform in. So definitely keep him in your player pool as well. Then you get into the Justin Baileys of the world at 5'8", back-to-back games of 27 and 28 fantasy points. He's fine. Langeles at 5'1", averaging over 50 fantasy points. I do think he struggles going up against the Minnesota front court, which does have some rebounders and some physicality to it. I would rather stick around and just play guards if I'm going to look at any of these USC upstate guys. You do have Jordan Surratt sitting there at 3.7. I could potentially see a spike of ownership there as people try to build out in slates that maybe lack the bottom of the barrel values. That's somebody who we could potentially see get some there. He has hit double-digit fantasy points in 3 of his 4 games played, and he is getting starter minutes as well. Minnesota side, Dawson Garcia, a freak. He's 9-1. He was super chalky against Missouri yesterday. He came away with 36 fantasy points, so basically got there. 4 of 12 from the field, played 37 minutes. You see, even against UTSA in the game that they blew them out, or Bethune-Cookman, he's still playing 34 to 35 minutes. So you don't have to necessarily worry about blowouts when it comes to Dawson Garcia, because he's going to be out there doing his thing anyways. He is a premium pay up at 9.1. It's a little bit on the lower side, but he is a very, very good option if you can get there. Looking around at the Minnesota roster, there are some names here and some talent, but this is clearly Garcia's team. And you look at it, he's dominating efficiency rankings across the board. 26.5% usage rate, 25% shot rate, 22.5% assist rate, solid. Offensive rebounding rate of 13%. He's drawing almost 8 fouls per 40. He's hitting about 33% from long range. Now, he's not a big volume guy. He's taking 9, but if he can maintain 3 of every 9, it's pretty good. And a 3.5% block rate. So going up against a team in USC Upstate that he'll be able to basically get any shot off that he wants. You look at his foul rate. Fouls drawn rate is so high in what he's doing. 14 of 16 from the foul line against Bethune, 7 of 7 against UTSA, and then 7 of 8 against Missouri. He's just generating points, whether that's driving to the basket and going to the foul line, hitting threes. I mean, there's a lot to like about Dawson Garcia here. Clearly one of the top pay-ups on this slate. The rest of the starting 5, I think, for Minnesota, they're a little bit lackluster. Now, I wrote about Missouri-Minnesota game yesterday, and I made a case for both teams. And what we saw was exactly what we thought. Tight rotations. The starters played most of the game. Minnesota side, Dawson Garcia, Braden Carrington, Elijah Hawkins, Isaiah Annan, and Joshua Ola Joseph. And then you had Cam Christie, Mike Mitchell and Pharrell Payne off the bench, but only Mike Mitchell off the bench saw more than 20 minutes in that one. Mitchell has been a disappointment so far. I really thought he was going to be fantastic right away for this team. He played for Pepperdine in the past. I feel like Mitchell has NBA upside, but he has not been able to break through just yet. He is playing relatively big minutes, though. Price isn't low enough at 5'8" just yet, but there will be a time where we can use Mike Mitchell, and I bet it's going to be sooner rather than later. You have Carrington there at 5'4", Pharrell Payne at 4'9". Payne had some really just massive slate-breaking games. He has a high fantasy point per minute player from the past, but it hasn't really gotten it going just yet as he kind of works his way back into I don't know if it's a health thing or what, but he missed some time there, and perhaps he works his way into the starting lineup. That is potential to happen, especially over a guy like Ola Joseph, or even Inan, who has not got a good history of health. Ola Joseph at 4'7" as a starter. It's a low-end play, but at least you know if he's starting, he's going to get about 20 to 25 minutes. 4'7", you don't need 30 fantasy points. If he gives you 15, you're not dead in the water by any means. I had Javier Francis yesterday not do a whole lot for me. Buchanan got about 18 at 4'7". Both of them were not great options at the end of the day, but they did enough compared to the rest of my lineup and what I was able to pay for because of them. It worked out just fine. I think Ola Joseph probably qualifies as a, give me 13 to 15 and we'll go ahead and move on kind of thing. You have Isaiah Inan at 5'9". He's been solid, had a real good game against UTSA. This is one where I think he could certainly beat up on a lesser opponent, although I don't think Minnesota should sleep on USC Upstate because they could punch them in the mouth. So I think Inan will be up for the challenge and is going to grab some boards and be a fine GPP type look, but not somebody that's going to be touching my main lineup anytime soon. The youngster off the bench, Cam Christie's too expensive right now. He had a really good first game, but it's just his price needs to come down or he needs to start. And then Elijah Hawkins at 7'6", kind of like this year's Talon Cooper. He's fine. He's not great. Price is just okay. It's not great. So really, we're taking Dawson Garcia here and feeling pretty damn good about it, right? USC Upstate side, Broadnecks, not to be fully ignored. Surratt, GPP value, and then we'll move ourselves along to the next game here. All right, next on the slate, Rhode Island. I'm real excited about Rhode Island on a slate, to be honest. Playing against Northwestern, neutral court game here. It is a 73-66 projection per KenPom in favor of Northwestern. This is a interesting game because I think Northwestern, playing the way they do, they're very slow, one of the slowest teams in the country. We know that. They're going to pretty much assert their will on most teams and slow things down. Now, they were 23.5-point favorites against Western Michigan, and a lot of us at FTN were on the Western Michigan side of that because Northwestern plays too slow. They don't have a super potent offense, and I don't think they're going to be beating too many teams by 20-plus points. So there may be a betting opportunity here against Rhode Island. We'll take a look here in a bit. As far as DFS goes, I think Northwestern is priced pretty accordingly or where they should be. Boo Buie at 8.3 is always a good look, especially for GPPs. It's rare to get him into your main lineup, and especially when we're talking about this kind of price, we'd be looking at 5.5 Boo Buie and be like, I don't know if I can justify this. So it's really difficult. He's taking a ton of shots. He's really honestly, Alpha 1A to surprisingly Brooks Braunheiser Alpha 1B. Looking at it, 29% shot rate, 30% usage rates, making about 36% of his triples, and he has an assist rate of 25%, drawing 5 fouls per 40. So Bowie's doing his thing as expected. The big surprise is Brooks Braunheiser, who has been a role player for the first few seasons of his career, and so far he's been absolutely ridiculous. 50 fantasy points against Binghamton. I warned that against Dayton he wouldn't do that. He didn't, but he still put up 37, which was shocking to me against that Dayton front court. Western Michigan, another big game, 27-3. I guess Brooks Barnheiser is here to stay, at least for now, in the non-con. You always hear me talk about non-con hero or players to be aware of because, hey, this guy, once we get into conference play, he's priced at 8K. Well, he's been averaging 35 fantasy points, and all of a sudden Barnheiser is averaging 10 to 12 fantasy points against way stiffer competition. So a very big candidate for non-con here. I want to be clear about that. But his rates are phenomenal so far. 13th most minutes per percentage, 26.1% usage rate, 25.6% shot rate. He has an offensive rebounding rate of 8.8%, a defensive rebounding rate of 27%, block and steal rates above 5%, drawing 5 fouls per 40. I don't know how much longer he can continue this. Paying 7-7 for Brooks Barnheiser against a very beatable Rhode Island team. The matchup's good and fine, but geez, that's such a tough price. I'm very curious to see how ownership lands on him. That's just really, really tough. I would say if he's going to be chalky or we get the inkling that he will be, I want to be underweight because I just don't believe it yet. And if people are going to be off and mostly afraid of that price, then maybe I want to be a little bit overweight just in case he does continue. They do have the Princeton transfer as well, Ryan Langborg. I want him to be cheaper before we consider him. He's going to take a bunch of shots, but right now he's the third option with the way Barnheiser is playing. You also have Matthew Nicholson in the front court. He had a big game in his first one. Did kind of, warn against using him against Dayton. Now, he wasn't great against them, and he wasn't great against WMU as well. That's historically the type of player we see Nicholson be. Not that he's bad, but, 5 points, a couple of rebounds and assists, 12 to 15 fantasy points. That's the player he typically has been. 5'9" is just not in the cards for me with him. Still have the, role player extraordinaire that takes a ton of shots when he can, and Ty Berry sitting there at 4'6", just not happening for him. You have Justin Mullins, youngster, not getting there yet. He will have his day to shine. Liberty transfer Blake Preston, just a role player. So really it just comes down to Bowie and Barnheiser, that you're going to be using from this Northwestern team. Both, like I said, are priced fairly or accordingly, and you can't use anyone else right now on this team. So if you're a believer in Barnheiser, go for it. Bowie, I just can't recommend in cash because we have history with him, right? But he's a great GPP play. So you'll have to decide for yourself if you're going to be a believer in Barnheiser, but that's just really, really tough for me. All right, now we get to the Rhode Island side, which I like quite a bit. Not because Northwestern's a great matchup. In fact, it's a terrible matchup. It sucks. It's a slow-paced game, and they like to defend and make things at a crawl. Rhode Island's tempo right now, tempo ranking 114th. They do like to speed it up under Archie Miller. They have a kid by the name of Jaden House that I am not enamored with, but really like. High point transfer. He was at High Point for years. High usage, high shot rate guy, high volume 3-point shooter. So low 30s, upper 20s 3-point shooter, but just a volume guy. Throughout the first 3 games, he's shooting 60% on 10 attempts from long range. So that's a good start. Shot rate 29.8%, which is in line with his last 2-year career average. 24% usage rate. Drawing 5 fouls per 40. He's just going to be an absolute bucket getter. And you look at his price at 6'3", he's absolutely a fantastic play. Knowing that Northwestern's defense will be tough, I still really like him because there's going to be a crazy amount of volume. The Wagner game, he was like going off in the first half. Had, I believe, 18 or 19 fantasy points. I know this because I have him in one of my important dynasty leagues, so I pay attention to stuff. And then he had nothing in the second half, so that was a little bit disappointing there. Fairfield game, kind of the same thing. Really fast start and then nothing. He had the most complete game in their first one when he had 39.5 fantasy points, 25, 4, and 3 steals on 18 shot attempts, made 10 of them. Really like Jaden House. Certainly going to be a guy that I'm leaning into here, even in this matchup. And I don't expect that a lot of people will, at least right now. I think as we build lineups and we start to really see what we're working with, maybe House gets a smattering of ownership, but I think right now we might be able to have him and be kind of an honorary posh play. Not officially, but honorary. The starting lineup that Rhode Island went with in their last game: Zeke Montgomery, Lewis Courtwright, Jaden House, David Fuchs, and Tyson Brown. Now, they only played 8 players in that game, and Rhode Island, looking at their roster and the way that their rotation has been constructed under Coach Miller, it looks like they're going to be relatively short bench in closer games, or at least the starters and like 2 of their bench pieces will play majority of the minutes. And they have 2 bench pieces in particular that I think are worth mentioning at the very least. One of which is Jeremy Fominia, playing upwards of 20 to 25 minutes. Had a really high usage rate off the bench in their game against Wagner, 33%. Took 14 shots, 16 real points, 7 rebounds. Was really good. And then the other kid named Always Right. And that's what I mean, Always Right. Parents had a very good sense of humor there with that name. Played 30 minutes off the bench, only 5 points, didn't do a whole hell of a lot of empty minutes there, but that is just a spectacular name. Always Right at 4K. Played 27 minutes in their first game, 14 in the second, and then 30 in their last. So the minutes are kind of going up and down there throughout the first 3, but he is a primary bench piece and somebody that, Miller's going to be using. Fuminia at 4K is interesting. He's taken 24 shots in the past 2 games alone. I really, really could see using him, but I could see it blowing up in our faces against Northwestern as well. When you pull the rates here, and you go over to Fuminia, his shot rate, 35%, his usage rate, 35%, offensive rebounding rate of 17.8%, block rate, 4%, and he's drawing 7 point fouls for 40. So he's really, really doing things here. He is only a freshman, 6'11", nearly 7 foot, just a Canadian kid, and he's very, very tough so far, and I am really, really interested in him. I'd like it better if he was starting and playing more minutes for sure. You might remember yesterday there was a player similar to this with a high usage, high shot rate in Brandon Walker from Montana State, which allowed one of our subs there, Mighty Hams, to win a GPP. This could be a GPP winner. If Fuminia gets 25 to 28 minutes like he did against Wagner, he's going to smash this price. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm some Rhode Island expert and have watched all their games. I have ESPN Plus, like a lot of you probably do, and I do stream more than your average guy does, and I have come across part of Rhode Island game, and what I saw of Jeremy Fuminia was really impressive, to the point where I'm like, why isn't this guy starting? Why isn't he playing bigger minutes? And he's still super young, so. I think we're going to be talking about a really good player throughout the not only this season, but for the next couple of years here. So that's the name I want to really be looking at here. You have Zeke Montgomery at 5'4", averaging almost 30 fantasy points per game. Now, I know I have a lean towards Jaden House, but Zeke Montgomery is playing really well. High assist rate at 21.4%, drawing over 5 fouls per 40, usage and shot rates above 20% as well. Played 37 minutes in that Wagner game there, 13, 11, and 6. Kind of flirted with that triple-double there. Absolutely somebody at 5'4" that you can consider. He would be the one that I think people, if they are using, would go to over House because they do get that $900 discount. And that just allows you some flexibility within the rest of your lineup. And then you have Lewis Courtwright, who by the way, Zeke Montgomery is a Bradley transfer. A lot of guys on this team are transfers. Lewis Courtwright transferred in from Quinnipiac, where he was a semi-stud last year for them as well. His price at 7K is a little bit tough to get to, 6'9" to be exact. He is fine. He is somebody who's going to probably get around 20 fantasy points, but we're paying almost 7K there when we can go to House or we can go to Montgomery. 2 guards who I think will have a better opportunity there to at least make value and are at a cheaper price. Kind of the same feeling with David Fuchs at 6'3". Fuchs has 1 really big game against Fairfield and 2 very mediocre games, and he's priced up at 6'3" there, which I think is probably not get to there wisely, and I don't think he's going to really pan out for you too often in that spot either. So we're really looking at Montgomery or House, and if you're not looking at either of those guys, I think Fuminia could be a value that could really do well for us. So that's where my head is at there for the Rhode Island game. Moving on to Oregon State versus Nebraska, the battle of what is going to amount to two very mediocre teams. Nebraska 72-63 per KenPom score projection. They are 165th tempo ranking. Oregon State 330th. Oregon State is 3-0. Took them overtime to beat Appy State. Took them double overtime to beat Troy, and they beat a non-D1 in Linfield there. So good on them. They have a tough portion of their schedule coming up here, Nebraska and Baylor. This Oregon State team not projected to be very good. The starting five that you'll typically see, Jordan Pope, Dexter Acano, Tyler Bilodeau, Christian Wright, and Chol Mariel. Relevant players off the bench, Casey Mbekwe and Thomas Ndong, as well as Josiah Lake. Now, in the overtime game against Appy State, Pope and Acano and Bilodeau, all three of them played 40 minutes. They were in the game for a long time. In the double overtime game, Dexter Acano played 48 minutes, Pope 44, Bilodeau 29. He fouled out. That's why. And because of that, Christian Wright ended up playing 42. And Mbekwe started the game over Ndong in that one, played 18. Ndong did well enough off the bench. They decided to give him a start. You're really looking at three players. And Mario got in the starting lineup this past game too, but he's just a fouler. And I don't know. So we've seen some variety in the starting five. There are three pieces that we can rely on, and we know we're going to get minutes, and that's obviously Tyler Bilodeau, Dexter Acano, and Jordan Pope. So let's take a look at their rates. Tyler Bilodeau, 25% usage rate, 27% shot rate. Defensive rebounding rate is semi-elite at 27.6%. That's top 70 at this moment. Block rate of 3.7%. Tyler Bilodeau. If the name sounds familiar, he had some flashes last year as a freshman. He is from Kennewick, which is in Washington as well. Washington has ballers. I try to tell you guys. Dexter Acano playing 92.6% of the minutes. Very, very high. 24.6% shot rate, 21.5% usage rate. His fouls drawn rate is 5.6. He's making 31% of his threes. Then you have Jordan Pope playing 89.5% of possible minutes. Highest offensive rating on the team, 21.1% usage rate, a 28.2% shot rate, 22% assist rate, and he's also shooting 41% from long range on 71 attempts. Now you have Casey Mbekwe with the highest usage rate on the team at 29.2%. He also has a combined rebounding rate of 27%, but his minutes are sporadic, whether he's starting or not. He is somebody in the past, like last year when we were super desperate for value we could use. He's down there at 3.7. You know, you're going to be looking to eke out a 15 from him and feel really good there. He did have 24 against Appy State, 10 points and 8 rebounds. Matching up against Nebraska. Don't love it for him because of Rink Mast and his ability to draw fouls. So I probably wouldn't recommend using Mbekwe as a main team value filler, but there's certainly worse options out there, right? So Mbekwe is not horrible in that regard. Acano at 5'2", like we're just been raking these 5 to 6K guards. Like they're just falling into our lap. The thing about Acano is he's going to play every single minute possible. 5'2", there's a lot of upside at that price, and at worst, he's going to give you 3x, and just should be able to fall into 4x minimum playing every minute of the game. So you have to like Acano for the reasons that we've talked about there with his rates and everything. Tyler Bilodeau also really cheap at 5'5". Again, there's foul trouble that could exist there because he plays in the front court a lot, but playing every possible minute in that last game, just about at least. High shot rate, solid rebounder, putting up some really good stats. Little bit more risky than Acano, but he's in play for sure. And then Jordan Pope, the most expensive of the trio at 7K. He put that 44 up, so I get it. But you look at his other two games, it's not really worth paying almost 2K more for Pope over Acano. I'll take that discount and likely get the same score, or maybe even Dexter outscores Pope there. And even if he doesn't, it won't be within like just 3 to 5 points. I doubt it would be another 44 for Pope, but maybe. GPP wise, there's something you could look at there. All right, Nebraska mentioned Rink Mast. he hasn't been cheap enough for me to really consider yet, and he's almost 9K again, but he's pretty damn consistent with what he's been able to do for this Nebraska team. Pulling it up here. Highest shot rate on the team at 26.5%, a usage rate of 25%, assist rate of 25%, drawing about 5 fouls per 40. So that's where the trouble could come in there, and has a combined rebounding rate of 38%. So a passing big man, we like those. The Max Fiedlers of the world, the Derek Walkers of last year. Like, give me those passing big men. Mast has the ability to rack up secondary stats like rebounds, assists, but he can also score the rock as well. It's just a little bit more tough to get there at 8-8, but this is a matchup that he can own. If there was a time this year, and we've had Nebraska, 3, maybe 4 times on the slate, this is the first one where I felt like, yeah, I could actually pay that for him and not feel like I'm overpaying. I think in a closer game, or at least if Oregon State can keep it somewhat close, like they've been, or another overtime perhaps, we're looking at 30, 32 minutes for Mast, and we're talking about a 40, honestly. So could be like the Brandon Carlson like breakout that we just saw yesterday against Wake Forest. Don't like Josiah Allick. He had that big first game. It looked like an anomaly to me, and it has been. So we're not using him there. Bryce Williams, I'd like to see his price come down a little bit more. He's very steady. Minutes are a little on the low side for me, but he's very active. Contributes in all categories. Was a star for Charlotte, or at least their best contributor, statistically speaking. His rates so far have been great. 25% usage rate. He's shooting 44% from long range on 16 attempts. 18% defensive rebounding rate, 23% assist rate, 6 fouls drawn per 40. I just want to see more minutes for Bryce Williams. More. Give me more. More Kobe Bryant. More. How much more can I use? More. So I need to see that from Bryce before we really get down to using him at 7-8. Kasai Tominega is back. That's going to take shots directly out of the pile from everyone, including Bryce Williams. So that's tough. Tominega at 6'3" is fine if you want to go there. I think he's probably better suited for GPPs because he's going to have to shoot, and shoot he does. He's going to shoot an awful lot. Right now, his shot rate is 35% in the 2 games he's played. So there will be no trouble with him shooting the rock. And then Juwan Gary, who missed the first few games due to suspension, off the bench against Stony Brook, and he was every bit as good as he was pre-injury last year. 23 minutes, 11 shots, 19 points, 7 rebounds, almost 30 fantasy points for Juwan Gary. Fantastic. 33% shot rate in that game, a defensive rebounding rate of 19%. Like, Juwan Gary is really, really good. Doesn't get enough credit for being really good, but if you recall early in the season for Nebraska last year, we were using him quite a bit, and he was like 7K at times. Expecting him to he should start over Josiah Allick. I don't know if the mayor will actually do that. Sorry that I got to play around here with my cords, but forgot to plug this in beforehand. So we're talking about a very weak, mediocre Allick play and a very strong high upside Gary play. It would not shock me to see Juwan Gary go into the starting lineup, and he should. Whether he does or not, that's another thing, but he definitely should. He is 6'1". It's a really reasonable price. He fills a forward role that, again, has been pretty tough to fill throughout the course of CBB DFS existence. Love Juwan Gary. I think this is a great matchup and a great spot for him to pull down a ton of rebounds, and he is also a guy that can make some passes and play a little bit at that free throw line quarterback position where he's hitting jumpers, he's making plays, getting assists, doing his thing. So we'll watch for that, but I certainly am on board with Gary. If he doesn't start, maybe he gets out of cash consideration into GBPs, but Juwan Gary is certainly better than Josiah Allick. I'm confident in that. All right, we'll move on to the next one here. We have Harvard coming at you with some Ivy business against Boston College and our guy Quentin Post. I had mentioned earlier, as far as payups, Dawson Garcia is great. Now today's payups on the slate, it was Keon Brooks, and you had Broom, and you had some others, but the payups on this particular slate are much more appealing already. You have the Creighton guys who are in a fantastic spot. Dawson Garcia, Mast is acceptable. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about Quentin Post here, who was fantastic in the last Boston College game that was just on the slate here recently. The KenPom projection here is 72-67 in favor of Boston College, so a close one. Harvard 258 tempo ranking, Boston College 284th. Now, Harvard is 4-0. They have started out well. Boston College has started out well also at 3-0. Wins for Harvard over Rice, a Rice team that we know is bad but fun. Northeastern, which has historically been a pretty competitive team, not so much early on. And then an overtime win over UMass, a UMass team that's coached by Frank Martin. Toughness all the way. So this Tommy Amaker coached Harvard team is no slouch by any means. And that UMass team has some definite studs on it. The rotation that Harvard used was about 7 deep in that game, and that was fantastic. I think that probably continues having the short bench. The starting lineup that they rolled with, now I don't know the full way to say this, so I'm just going to say it how it looks and try not to laugh like a schoolgirl. Chandler Piggy, I should say, played 42 minutes, 15 points, 11 rebounds, 2 steals. Malik Mack, the return of the Mack, 40 minutes, 32 points, 23 shots. You simply love to see stat lines like that, especially in the Ivy League, which continues to churn out solid teams and solid DFS performers. Louis Lesman played 37 minutes, 14 points, 4 rebounds. Chisholm Akpara played 32 minutes, 8 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. And then Justice Ajabar, 18 minutes, 8 rebounds, fouled out. Thomas Baddies played 31 minutes because of Justice fouling out. Had Justice not fouled out, I suspect the bench would have all played under 20 minutes. Why do I suspect that? Well, let's go back and look. The game against Northeastern, even though that was a blowout, the starters still played the most minutes. You had 2 guys play 20 minutes and the rest of the bench all under 10. That was in a blowout. A closer game against Rice, everyone on the bench played less than 17 minutes. Very consistent, style going on here for Tommy. They're playing their starters into the ground. Love it. Malik Mack, 32.7% usage rate, 34.5% shot rate. He's already taken 22 threes in their first 3 games. He has made 11 of them. This freshman has come out super hard, and he's smart, going to an Ivy school, right? And he's balling out. 37.3% assist rate, drawing 5 fouls per 40. Chisholm Akpara, 32% shot rate, 32% usage rate. Chandler Piggy, shooting 40% from long range. Excellent free throw shooter to this point, drawing 5 fouls per 40. A sophomore, very young team that they have here, but those are the primary usage guys to look at. Now you peep out the pricing. You have Mac at a 6'8" price point that is pretty reasonable going up against a Boston College team that is probably improved. We don't have enough games under our belt to really say for sure one way or another, but they're likely an improved team defensively. Up against Richmond, we saw a huge first half from Jordan King. We were all on him for the most part, at least at FTN. And then he somehow fitbitted the rest of the second half and played 38 minutes, but put up like 2 fantasy points in the second half. It ended up being Neil Quinn who just scorched BC and the only member of Richmond that did anything in the second half. But defensively, Boston College, as I mentioned, an improved unit, but nowhere near elite. They gave up 71 to the Citadel, barely beating them. 4 different players scored in double digits against them there. And then the game against Fairfield, in which they won pretty comfortably by 19. 3 different players scored 12-plus points, 2 of which scored 18-plus. One of them, Bryson Goodine, who used to be a Providence role player many years ago, torched them for 22. 8 for 18 from the field. So we don't have to be scared of Boston College. I want to give them the respect and say, yeah, they're improved, but they're not shutting anyone down. So we can look at the 6'8" price point for Malik Mack, and yes, he's a freshman, but he just has the green light, and he's playing all the minutes he can possibly handle. And I think people will look at that and see 12 attempts, 16, 11, 23, then he's taken 10 threes, 5, 7, 6. This is a really good player. High assist rate. He's setting the table for others. He's going to be very, very, very good for this Harvard program. And I think we're talking about a guy who could potentially put together numbers of a 9K player at a 6.8K price point. So I'm all over that. Chisholm Akpara, second on the team in usage, as we mentioned. 2 of his 3 games over 30 fantasy points, at least in the D1 opponents. Minutes have been a little bit sporadic there. There is foul trouble potential for sure, especially with the Quinton Post front court. And then Piggy at 4K. Very good value. Not just because I think that he's going to definitely pan out, but he's going to be on the floor for big minutes, likely 30 plus. He scored double-digit real points in 3 of his 4 played. I think that Chandler Piggy is a very, very good value. I almost want to use multiple Harvard pieces here because the prices on most of them are reasonable, and the highest priced of 6.8 on Mac is probably underpriced on him as well. So there are 3 pieces on this roster, possibly even 4, if you wanted to look at Oshogbar at 5.1, who has foul potential as well here in this game and is a little bit more inconsistent or a wider range of outcomes with his fantasy output, but he's also got to be considered in play at 5.1. So really 4 different guys on Harvard that you could play. Don't stack Harvard, obviously, but if you end up with 2 of their players, I think it'll be fine. On the Boston College side, it pretty much starts and stops with Quinton Post. Now, there's other options on this team, but they're all priced so high. The 8.7 on Post is fine. I'm good there. Put up a huge score there against Richmond, 17, 10, and 5. We have another passing big men. Like, you can't even call this style of play a unicorn anymore because there's just so many athletes at the collegiate game that these guys aren't even like the most athletic. They're not the most electric. They're not out there hitting a million threes. They're not posterizing anyone. They're just playing fundamental, strong basketball, and they're filling out a box score, and that's what we like. So Quinton Post has got to be considered probably a top 2 or 3 pay up on the slate. Looking at his rates, he's come so far from when he was a role player, 2-bit, 4-7 player for Mississippi State for a couple of years. He's just really come into his own, and it's cool to see because the way he plays is awesome. 27.9% usage rate, 27% shot rate, 22% defensive rebounding rate, and assist rate of 22.3% even. Again, there you go. The passing big men, they're not a dying breed right now. 8.6% block rate, and he's making 59% of his threes. That's on 12 attempts. So that'll obviously regress to a point, but Quinton Post is that dude. There are some intriguing prospects on this team. The Donald Hands of the world who have upside. He's there at 5.1. Upside, but obviously downside. There are a litany of wings and guards on this team that sort of cannibalize each other from Mason Madsen to Prince Aligbe, Chaz Kelly, Jaden Zachary, Devin McLaughlin. So it makes it really hard to really like any of them too much. We did mention that Prince Aligbe is way better than he had played in the first 2 games, and we saw he went off for 15 and 10 against Richmond. His price has jumped up a little bit to 5.2. He does carry that guard forward eligibility. If you get to a point where you're in love with another pay up, you can't get to Quinton Post, but you want some exposure to this team, it's real obvious to go to Aligbe instead. Again, there's a bit of cannibalization happening here with these different players. Claudel Harris has got to be involved in that as well. And it's going to maybe take some of that top end upside off of most of these guys. And you're not getting huge discounts. Zachary at 7.5, McLaughlin's at 7K there. McLaughlin, kind of steadily putting up 20 fantasy points, but at 7K opportunity cost. Harris, is good. Not great. We need that price to come down further, I think. Hand is going to be solid. Madsen at 3.8 is at least, hey, that's 20 minutes. Can you get me 15 to 20? He certainly could. So there's a lot of different avenues and ways to approach this particular game. I actually think Madsen could potentially be a main team player there, depending on how many studs you want, but obviously know that he could give you 5 as well. So again, another BC game coming out that we're going to want multiple pieces of. Post on the BC side is obvious. Aligbe, Madsen, kind of like alt plays there. And then on Harvard, I think Mac is just way too good not to roster at that 6.8 price point. There's been some really solid mid-major guys around that 7K range. Hike him the other day. He just feels like really kind of an easy click and move on for me. I like the Harvard mini stack though, for sure. All right, next game on the slate, Howard versus Rutgers. Howard, I love this Howard team, man. I don't even say that, facetiously in any way. Howard is 2-2. They lost to a very good James Madison team that's going to make some noise in the tourney. Dropped a close one at Georgia Tech that they had the lead for a while. Beat a Hampton team. Beat Boston University. Hampton under Coach Kenny Blakely. They're going to play a fast-paced style, which is what they typically do. Defense is a lot of times optional. I do think that they defend better than their efficiency rankings will say, but this Howard team has some real firepower on it. Shai Odom, starting with him, had he not been banged up during the latter part of his high school career, there were probably offers waiting for him at bigger schools. He's a primary candidate to transfer to a high major next year, depending on how he finishes up this season here. 7.2K. He's been pretty ordinary, the last two games, but you see in his first two, especially against Georgia Tech, 22, 7, and 4. He was actually relatively chalky in that game at 7-1. So at 7-2, I don't know that people will be on him necessarily, but it is a player that people are aware of. Last year in the tournament, Odom he paid off his 4-7 price point. Then he's going to play a lot of minutes here. Rutgers defense, we know, is legit. The rebounding side for Odom might not be there against that Rutgers front court. So there is downside there to using Odom for that reason alone. 25% shot rate, 26% usage rate. His defensive rebounding rate, 19%. 25% assist rate. So Odom's doing big things here. Bryce Harris, actually the highest shot rate on the team at 27%, a 25.4% usage rate, 10% offensive rebounding rate, and a 3% block rate. 6'3". He's been pretty solid regardless of opponent. Georgia Tech, Hampton, he's been steadily putting up around 30-plus fantasy points in each of these games. Does get the, I don't want to say weaker necessarily, but maybe the more advantageous path to fantasy points is through Harris rather than Odom. You also have Marcus Darkery sitting there at 5'9", at least somewhat intriguing. Wasn't great against Georgia Tech for his price, but it's dropped down to 5'9", and he's somebody that's playing a big role for this Howard team, and is somebody that if you're building a balanced lineup, 5'9" kind of fits in there nice and cozy. He is part of the starting lineup with Shai Odom, with Bryce Harris. The other two starters, Joshua Strong, AJ Magbagor, not really too keen on either of those guys for fantasy purposes by any means. But it is significant to mention former Penn transfer Jelani Williams, and he was a big-time player for Howard last year. He got into his first bit of action, played 28 minutes off the bench, 7 points, 6 rebounds, an assist, and 4 steals. So, getting him back, that's big. He is only 4'6". A potential for him to get into the starting lineup. There is a really, really good chance that happens. Also, Seth Towns gets his waiver for what should be his final collegiate season. He's been around for a long time. Seth Towns was really, really talented. Looked like a guy who could potentially play in the NBA one day. He was, at Harvard, just a complete stud, conference player of the year type. Couldn't get healthy at all for Ohio State. Played very minimal games there. Gets the waiver to play his final season here in 23-24. To give you an idea, he had been at Harvard in the 17-18 season. So he's been around a long time. The guy can play basketball and healthy. The question is, how healthy is he going to be? He's 3.6K going against, like I said, a tough Rutgers team. 25 minutes in his season debut, first competitive basketball game in years, 13 points, 6 rebounds, had 26.5 fantasy points. Looking at the starting group that Howard runs, Now that they have those two guys, it would seem as though it would make the most sense to start Towns and Jelani along with Shai Odom, Marcus Dockery, and Bryce Harris. Like that starting five is going to be so good in the MEAC. I don't know that they're going to lose too many games. And they did a nice job in their non-con. Like Rutgers, James Madison, Georgia Tech. They've got a game against Cincinnati coming up. Tough Penn game. Their UC Santa Barbara is always good. Like they have a really good non-con. This Howard team is going to murder the MEAC. Absolutely murder the MEAC. So I have some big interest in Howard here as well, similarly to the Harvard squad. I don't know that I necessarily want to be stacking against Rutgers by any means. Looking at the projection there, 78.65 per Ken Palm. Not horrible. Howard 35th in tempo ranking, and of course Rutgers 256, but they're top 25 in defensive efficiency. So again, stacking Howard guys against Rutgers, maybe not the most optimal decision that you can make, but the prices on most of these guys is really cheap. And I do think Jelani Williams and Seth Towns will get the start sooner rather than later. Will it be in this game? Perhaps. Even if they don't start, I do think they're fine values, though. I think the big decision point is if you want to use Odom or Harris in your main. Don't think we're there with Dockery, at least right now. Rutgers side, you have my man Cliff Amarui. I just can't get there with him at this price. We just talked about it here recently in their game against Georgetown. Like I love Clifford Amarui, and we're usually used to paying like $7K for him, but he doesn't have the high shot rate, and he doesn't create. Like most of his stuff has to come on putbacks, or if the guards do make an entry pass, has to be deep in the lane. He's just not getting enough there. And if he's not blocking a ton of shots and pulling down double-digit rebounds, I just don't think he's paying off this 8.5 price. And yes, it is Howard. He should have an advantage, right? But this Howard team, again, they're not suckers. They're a good club, and I just don't know that Amarui's paying off 8.5 as much as we would like to see. He was having trouble paying off 8K, 7.5 last year. We're probably looking at a 32, 35 score out of him more often than not. And we have several other pay-ups in his range that we know can get 50. I don't know that Amarui can get 50. He could, but it seems very unlikely, right? The rest of Rutgers, I still really like Derek Simpson, who after kind of being reprimanded for a bad, start to the season, was back in the starting lineup there, played 29 minutes, 4 assists, 15 points, 25.75 fantasy points. I do like Derek Simpson at that price. He makes sense to me as a mid-tier type of play, mid-range balanced. Noah Fernandez at 7K is a no thank you. I don't mind Andre Hyatt in this matchup. Hyatt seems to be, he's super athletic, and in the matchups where they face agile or teams that like to push the pace, that's where you want to use Hyatt, and that's where he kind of excels. And you saw that against Georgetown, 12.7 rebounds, had a couple assists, a couple of steals. He was really solid in that game. Bryant, kind of similar to that. They, typically in the past have been a high possession team. They make things happen, and he had 40, 19, 8, 2 blocks, 2 steals. So he's been steady. 6'8" is not a price I think we fall into very often with him, but he's playable. And if that's like your last guy in type of thing, I have no issue with it being Andre Hyatt. Obviously, he's got forward eligibility there, so that makes it even better. And then you have the freshman Gavin Griffiths, who wasn't great against Georgetown, but he is playing, around 20 minutes there. You'd like to see him start. He's still taking a ton of shots. Looking at his rates, he has the highest shot rate on the team at 31.1%, highest usage rate at 28.3%. He's already taken 23 triples. He's made just 6, so 26%, but there's a lot of volume there. And at 5'2", he's probably not quite main team viable yet, but he's an excellent GPP play because of how many shots he's taken. And he could score like 30 real. The kid has that ability. At 5'2" to obliterate. Obviously not going to get you much in those peripheral categories, but he is going to be a guy that scores and takes a ton of shots. So he can be viable in that regard. All right, so let's move on to the last game on the slate, Texas Southern versus Creighton. Texas Southern has seemingly been coached by Johnny Jones forever. I know he was at LSU before that, but Texas Southern team that tends to play tough non-con schedules. Then they get into their SWAC conference and SMAC, and they smack the SWAC and they get in the tournament. So far, they've played a really rough schedule: New Mexico, Arizona State, Virginia. They've lost all of those games, although they were pretty close against ASU. Now they've got Creighton, Oral Roberts, Drake, and Purdue coming up. So they always do this. This is the way that Johnny Jones schedules. Defensively, Texas Southern is 110th in defensive efficiency and 130th tempo ranking. So they're a team that can defend, but they're not going to do well against this Creighton team. And the reason they smack the SWAC is because they play these hard teams, and you get a lot better when you play teams better than you, right? Creighton offensive efficiency, 4th best in the country under Greg McDermott, 30th best defensive efficiency. Their 2-point percentage, 2nd best in the country. They're just getting a lot of easy looks. They're a great passing team, and they're just making things happen. That win against Iowa was uber impressive. It was high scoring. They were never really in danger of losing. It was 92-84, but I don't think they were ever really in danger of losing that game. Looking at the Texas Southern group, they typically go with a really deep rotation. Johnny Jones is sort of like Leonard Hamilton light in that regard, and that he's gonna play 9, 10, 11 guys. Doesn't matter if they're gonna be in a blowout or a close game, like they're going to play 9, 10, 11 guys every single time. They do have a transfer on their team from Fresno State. He was with Eastern Washington last year by the name of Deion Stroud. And Deion Stroud, during 2021 season at Fresno State, he had a 32% shot rate. Very, very good volume shooter, and somebody who is really interesting. But he doesn't really do a whole lot else, and the shot's not been falling for him. He is only 3'8", and I feel like Stroud, having that experience against upper tier competition. I mean, it was only a few years ago. I remember vividly using Stroud as an alt play at 2% and him coming through in a big way. Started his career at UTEP, by the way, so he's been all over the place. Now, he came off the bench in his first 2 games, but he did start against Virginia, played 19 minutes. His usage rate was 24%. He had 4 steals, 4 points. The game off the bench prior to that against Arizona State, 17 minutes, he had a usage rate of 32%. So he's still doing what he's always done, just in shorter spurts because he's playing on such a deep team. But Deion Stroud is somebody at 3'8". He's a kind of a sneakier value. Obviously, the matchup against Creighton, not so bad, but he just played against Virginia. He had 14 fantasy points. ASU, he had 13.5. Like, he can definitely get close to 4x here. We have other values we've already mentioned that we like, but Stroud is somebody to at least be aware of here. The rest of it, I mean, PJ Hunter's typically been the best player on this team or the highest scoring fantasy option, but I just don't have really any love for anyone. I wanted to pull Stroud out on you so you could at least be aware, like, oh, that's where he ended up. But there's nobody on Texas Southern particularly exciting. On the Creighton side, all last year it was always like 7 to 7.5. We were just telling you, like, they're pretty much priced where they should be. Not a lot of upside. And now we're looking at prices just uber high. Trey Alexander's turned into a star before our very eyes. He's incredible. I don't even know if we can fade him. I know the price of 9.5 is just stupid high at this point, but sheesh. Even in the blowout, he put up a solid 35 over Florida A&M, and then 47 the game after that. So it's tough to fade. Obviously, the Iowa game required him to shoot 19 times. He almost had a triple-double, 23, 11, and 9. He won't be needed to that extent against Texas Southern, but it's still a scary fade, a very, very scary fade. Baylor Shireman at 9.2. He's a good GPP pivot off of Alexander, who's been a little bit more popular. Shireman not rebounding at as high a clip as he was in previous years yet. Still very early. Still a very safe floor player, but we like Shireman in that 7.5 range, not 9.2. So it's hard to get there. Opportunity cost. We can get 30 from somebody at 5.5, 6K. We've already said some options, right? Ryan Kalkbrenner at 8.2. We're starting to get there on his price, but we need it to go down even further. Started the season at 9.6. Ryan Kalkbrenner's not the alpha of this team. He's somehow not rebounding at a high clip. My buddy Forsty, who some of you know, it's funny. I don't think you watched the show that I talked about Creighton, but I always mention like Kalkbrenner's rebounding props. It's such an L. Like they put it at 4.5, 5.5, 6.5. And you're like, well, he should get that all day. And maybe you just don't pay attention and you slam the over. And then you start looking at it like, man, this guy never gets 6 rebounds. He never gets 5. And he had said in one of our group combos, like, I guess the 5.5 rebounding prop was no good. And it's like, hey, you got to experience it too, I see. So Kalkbrenner 8-2 is at least interesting against Texas Southern, but being that he's not the alpha, he's not going to take a bunch of shots. He's going to block shots, but he's just not rebounding. Like rebound the ball. He should be getting as many rebounds as Zach Edey. He's not as skilled as Zach Edey, but how the hell can he be averaging less than 4 rebounds? Like it is so weird how he does not ever hit his prop. Like I'm tempted at this point to bet rebounding unders, and I never bet unders. I do sometimes, but I prefer overs. And I like the under 5.5 rebounds for Kalkbrenner might actually just be optimal. He might have been leaving money on the table the last year and a half. Honestly, looking at Kalkbrenner, low usage, low shot rate. His offensive rebounding rate is 9.3%, but he has a combined rate under 20%. That's just can't happen for a dude that's 7'1", 275 pounds. Like he should be rebounding the basketball a lot more than that. But the price is getting there. I could see him actually having a lot of ownership at 8-2 because that's reasonable for people. If he slips under 8K, he's going to be the chalkiest player on any slate under 8K. And he probably should be. Last year, whenever that happened, he would be like 30, 40, 50% owned. And then you have the transfer from Utah State, Stephen Ashworth at 6'6". Hasn't had to do a whole lot in those blowout games, but he also did very little against Iowa, which was certainly concerning. So he's not in play for me at 6'6". It's a more appealing price than when he started out at 8'1". But Trey Alexander is just doing so much heavy lifting, and then Baylor Shireman's basically getting the rest, that it's not leaving anything for Ashworth. And Ashworth, where his value came in, was his three-point shooting and his passing. He's been a fine passer. He's gotten some assists, but his three-point shooting, other than the Florida A&M game, has been pretty non-existent. So still has to kind of figure out this new role in this new group of guys that he plays with. You have Isaac Trout there at 5'2". He's no longer a good play over 5K. Under 5K, he's at least in consideration. Now, a guy who can rebound is Frederick King, and he played only 12 minutes against Iowa, but his kind of very high fantasy point per minute number had over 17 fantasy points in 12 minutes. The game before that, he had 16 in 12 minutes, and then 24 in 20 minutes against Florida A&M. Once they blow the doors off Texas Southern early and we get into the midway point of the second half, we may see Frederick King play 18 to 22 minutes. And if he does, I do like his chances of making value at 4.9, but that is a very risky play in your main build. That's certainly just a GPP maneuver only, because we don't know if he'll play 10 or if he'll play 20. But this is a matchup that Frederick King can own, and he is a much better rebounder, at least on paper, than Ryan Kalkbrenner. His offensive rebounding rate alone is well over 20%, defensive rebounding rate over 25%. So obviously short spurts there, so you can't quite put those to everyone else, but in you magnify that by a guy playing 25 to 30 minutes, I mean, you're talking about a real freaking beast of a player. And you might remember when Kalkbrenner had mono last year and missed 3, 4, 5 games, whatever it was, King got the start and he just melted slates repeatedly. He had an off night, like the fourth one out, but the first 3 games as a starter, he couldn't miss. He was putting up 20-plus fantasy points because he's blocking shots, he's grabbing every rebound possible, hitting jumpers. Like Frederick King is really good. When Kalkbrenner moves on after this season, Frederick King's going to step into a role and be a legitimate player. Like, do not be surprised if next year we're talking about an 8K Frederick King. So enjoy him at 4.9 while you can. All right. So that is the slate. We did it. We are a bit long-winded with it, but you get me talking about this stuff and I just can't stop. This is a very good slate. I really like this slate. Probably so far, my top 2 favorite slate in the first 2 weeks, easily. Core is a little bit different because I like a lot of different options here. I'm gonna have to really work on minimizing my player pool under 25 to 30 guys because I don't want to be going too crazy. But I'm not really doing the MME thing yet, like a lot of you are. I usually wait till after November for that. But this is a slate where I kind of want to do that, if that tells you anything. So core for me at the moment would be the following, and that's subject to change. Start there. For Harvard, I just love the Malik Mack kid. He's such a hashtag Waltz guy, and it's just ridiculous. Everything about his game is what I look for in my posh plays and just guys that I like the way they play style of basketball. So Malik Mack, if you can't get there, Piggy at 4K. I mean, that would be the way to go. But Mack, core play number one. Number two, we'll go with a high price guy, and we'll say Dawson Garcia because I do think he's just way too safe. I know 9-1's a lot, but I just feel like he's going to have 40 at minimum, and I don't know if we can get away without him. I think he'll be popular as well. Creighton, blowout risk. Mast is not putting up 40 plus, although he could in this matchup. Quentin Post is the next best thing. Cliff Omorui's not going to do it. Kalkbrenner's not going to do it. Boo Booey is all over the place as usual. So if Garcia puts up 45 to 50, look at the rest of the player pool. Quentin Post, and who else is putting up 50? So without Garcia, I think we could be up Schitt's Creek if he goes off. So I got to just core him and call it a day. But I do like Post a lot. And there is a chance for me to play both with the value that we've seen. And then the third member of the core, this one's tougher because there's so many options, values that I like. And I like Rhode Island to Oregon State to Boston College. Like there's just a lot to like. I think I will go with a Rhode Island player in this as third member of the core. I'm having a really hard time not wanting to play Jeremy Funtenia at 4K. Might be a bit too risky, but when have you known me to ever be safe? So that'll be the third member of the core, Jeremy Funtenia, because God, man, he just looks way too good. So him, Dawson Garcia, and Malik Mack is the core that we got right now. But I'm very high, just to give you kind of another rundown here to sum it up. Very high on Jaden House, Zeke Montgomery from the same Rhode Island squad, Dexter Acano, Bilodeau from Oregon State, Quentin Post, obviously, Harvard, Okpara, Piggy, in addition to our guy Mack. And then on Howard, I like Odom, Harris, Williams, Towns, depending on that starting lineup, and Derek Simpson on the Rutgers side. So it's kind of the player pool we're working with. There's going to be a chunk more in the article in the morning, but that could get you started and see where my head is at as we build here into the morning, and enjoy watching the rest of the Husky game. Very close 53-52 score with 10 minutes left, so I'd be able to watch that and see what's what. Appreciate you guys. Let's go over, before we move on, let's go to the prop market and see if we got any goodies that we can talk about beforehand. We've been on a little bit late considering what PrizePicks normally does with their stuff, so they don't even have CBB up yet, which does not surprise me. And then the props for tomorrow, if we've got them, they've got 3 games up at the moment: Upstate Minnesota, Rhode Island Northwestern, and Nebraska Oregon State. Zeke Montgomery, a PRA of 19.5. Anytime, you guys might notice what I really lean towards on props. I like PRA. I just feel like it's really advantageous. I know Kutry likes to do the points and the rebound individual, but the combo stats are just, they're paying the bills for us right now. And I like the ones that are 15.5 to 19.5, especially on starters. So Zeke Montgomery over 19.5 minus 115. That's one I'm all over. It's a tough spot, obviously, against Northwestern, but I like that for Montgomery. And then Dawson Garcia's PRA is probably a bit high at 29.5. I do think he makes it for what it's worth. So over 29.5 PRA at -120. And then we have alt points for Dawson Garcia 20 plus at +115. Certainly taking that. And then we have over 18.5 at +105. So I like both of those for Garcia confidently as well. They also have his rebounding number at 8.5, which is +105. I think he has a double-double with ease against Upstate. Again, this is an Upstate team that is much better than people probably realize, but Dawson Garcia is just otherworldly at this moment in time. Otherworldly, honestly. So that's all the props that we have. They don't have any more for tomorrow yet, but they will have more. Those will go into the tracker on ftnbets.com. If you haven't checked that site out before, you definitely should. Tracker information shows bets from the previous night. Get an idea of what people are putting up. There are notifications on Twitter for those as well, so you can see them as they happen. And there are just absolute decimation happening from our own Mike Cuttrie's killing it once again. Our pro sports bettors are killing it once again. Josh Gross, who covers women's college basketball betting, he is a freaking genius and crushes that as well. So you can check that out at ftnbets.com. And then get the special deal on ftndaily.com for the Night Hoops 50% off your first subscription. That will do it for the CBB Super Show. Thank you to everyone that hung out with me. I appreciate it. I'll be back bright and early in the morning, 1 hour before the CFB lock. The article's up on the site right now, so you can get yourself acclimated with that. And also yesterday's show with Jake Kuchek, where we break down every game on the college football side in detail. Definitely check that out as well. Lots of stuff happening this weekend. Take care, guys, and I will see you in the morning. Let's light up those green screens.